Benefit Deal of Nothing. Eryca's rapping again.
Hello.
Yay. We've got Oliver again, obviously, because he's in every single episode, because this is our thing. But who the hell is this?
Hello.
It's Finn.
I'm Finn.
This is Finn.
I'm Finn. I'm just a friend of Eryca and Oliver. So.
And a writer.
And a writer. I am a writer, actually.
And a poet.
And I guess I write a few poems as well from time to time.
Yeah, you've read some at Howlers. You're a poet.
I have. I do write a bit of poetry, and I guess that's what we're here to talk about today.
That is what we're here to talk about today.
Yay.
How long is it going to take for Oliver to mention Max Porter?
Well, I currently haven't got Max Porter on the...
And
I
technically, I'm mentioning
like
Seamus
4
Heaney.
seconds there. You just mentioned him
That
already.
was technically me, right? Well, before we get fully into this episode, to break us in, because I think this is what we all need in our life, we're going to have an Oliver Lewis original poem
That is so
reading.
true. So exciting.
From his new not new collection, but from his newly printed. Do you want to introduce the collection after or before?
Go on, Oliver. Give a bit of a self-plug.
Self-plug! Yay!
Love to see it. Come on.
Right, I'm going to
This is awful.
Okay, right.
I'm going to have to do it for you at this rate.
Okay, this is called Lampoonery of the Shallow and Other Poems, and it's a collection of poems that focuses particularly on mocking the narrow-minded and shallow people in society and the empty pursuit of status.
We spoke about it a little bit in the last episode, and I thought, well, I want to talk about poetry. Shockingly, Eryca wants to talk about poetry of the two. And I thought, well, let's take this as an opportunity to get Oliver to read it. And luckily Finn's here, because if I try and push Oliver to promote his stuff, I basically forced him to do it last episode.
You need 2 people, don't you?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Last episode was a lot for Oliver to actually promote. So proud of you, by the way.
Thanks.
But now I'm pushing him to do it even more because Finn's here. So Finn can basically hold a gun to his head.
No better time to do it now when you've got a few gigs lined up as well, a few shows.
We've got a tour. He's got a tour.
He's got a tour.
The tour will be done, I think, by the time.
I feel like by the time you see this, it'll be a few weeks in the past.
It'll be like 2 weeks, a week.
But he's constantly doing tours, aren't you? To be fair, you did one last semester. You're doing one this semester.
Yeah, but it
Well,
wraps
you do
up on
another
the 16th of March. So,
That is
however,
true.
I will
That
say
is
this
true.
actually. Speaking of Seamus Heaney,
Oh,
There
we go.
because I imagine you'll be seeing this before May. So if you live in and around the York area on the 9th of May in City Screen, in the city centre, there's going to be an evening called Open Ground, which I have curated an evening of amazing performers, musicians, creatives, poets from York and the surrounding area to basically do performances paying homage to the work of Seamus Heaney. So I'd really like it if you would like to come. That'd be very good. I think tickets will be about £8. If you can spare £8, that would be very nice.
Very exciting.
And so now, introducing an original poem.
There we go.
What do you have for us, Oliver?
This is called A New University Poem, and it's about the disorientation of entirely new social situations, and it's after Nabokov's university poem. So there's a few borrowed lines. So then, you're Welsh. It's the first time I've met a Welshman. In line with one's curious eyes, I begin to write these very words. Let us call it a university poem, conceived on the ooze in a dream, in a boat, in a dream, in the dream boat. Lollopin, though the dream boat has no legs, the tide is choppy, in terribly unromantic, tenebrous waters. Carried forth is the boat, as if by a river's ulterior motive. So then, you're Welsh. How are the valleys? Not from the south, I say back. Born in England, matter of fact. Thus, in a suitably matter-of-fact manner, I get up and stand on the bow of the boat. It tips forward slightly, urging one to dive. Most gouachely, I do so. Dive. Try to. Upon making contact with the river itself, I am at once returned, miraculously, back to my aforeseated position. So then, you're Welsh. It's the first time I've met a Welshman. This again. So then, you're Welsh. It's the first time I've met a Welshman. This again. Except in this newly forced upon me social discomfort, the inevitability of such a situation takes me by the hand, leading forth. It holds my hand so tight it feels as if my fingers may snap. There. They do snap. Wonderful. A dream so pleasant as this. A dream in which inevitability breaks my hands in two. But I swear we should be falling in love. Falling in love over tea on some sunny day. So let us journey and journey and journey.
Beautifully.
Very
So you're
interesting
Welsh?
poem. Oh, I've never met a Welshman.
We're insufferable. So actually, quite swimmingly, you've done me a great service here with a bit of rejigging in my think tank of points that I want to talk about today. You mentioned that you borrowed some lines to that poem. This is actually something I really want to talk about today because I am finally getting into poetry.
Yay.
Woo!
About time. I am still incredibly daunted by said writing form. And one thing that I've actually been battling with lately is finding a line between inspiration from other people's work and a desire to, in a really nice way, be like, God, that line's really good. And I think you're really talented with this, and it's also something that I've actually looked into with other people's poetry and work, is borrowing lines from people. I didn't know it was like a normal thing to do until now.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it just happens pretty naturally. That poem, a new university poem, Nabokov's poem, is called The University Poem. So it is kind of my own personal response to that. I mean, his is extremely long and very narrative. It goes on for 30-something pages, and it's up there with the best poems I've ever read. It completely, just changed me when I read it. I remember when I did read it, I would just go back over the next few days and just keep reading stanzas from it. And I think it's just something that stuck with me for a very long time. But there's a very specific image in that poem of him and his lover travelling along a river on a boat, having afternoon tea, basically. And I think it's an incredibly beautiful and romanticised image, and it's something that, can be achieved in life, I suppose. But I feel like the irony of it being called, the university poem, and then my experience of moving to university being so, in many senses, less romantic.
Yeah.
In that scenic sense, and feeling almost as if I feel like if I was on that boat when I first moved to university, the river would be in control. The river would be taking me. I wouldn't have time to be having tea on the river. So that's kind of where it came from. But yeah, the So Then You're Welsh is how Nabokov's opens, but not Welsh. I think
That's
it's
really
I think it's So Then You're Russian.
You always use a bit of a little cheeky line here, there, and everywhere, don't you? And I find it easier to write responsive poetry than it is to write responsive prose.
Yeah.
That's a lot more targeted at what you want to target. I think the thing with poetry is it elicits imagery a lot more than prose does. And I think that one thing that I am trying to become more comfortable with is it's okay to use that imagery quite obviously. Yeah. And I think that's something I just wanted to talk about because, I don't know, it's one thing that I'm sort of exploring at the minute with poetry. I'm exploring a lot of poetry.
It's really interesting. Yeah, same, to be fair. I also find interesting taking reference from other forms, not just poetry as well. So, like, writing in response to, like, a song or a film or something like that. Like at the moment, I'm trying to write in response to a song, and it's quite tricky. I've never written in response to anything before. Trying to write a poem in response to the song "Car Radio" by 21 Pilots, which is quite, I guess, a weird song to write in response to. But it has like the deeper meaning of like anxiousness and not being able to drown out your thoughts with like a radio, basically.
Car radio.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I always just get panicked with it. I don't know. I didn't know it was a thing. To like actually be able to be like, this, I took this, because I would be like, oh my god, it's like cheating on a maths test.
Well,
like I looked at someone's answer.
There's two ways I kind of see of looking at it. I will fall into the latter personally, but you've got one of my favourite kind of prime examples of not even a borrowed line, a borrowed poem is in Raymond Antrobus's collection, The Perseverance, where he takes Ted Hughes's poem Deaf School and he reproduces it in his book entirely blacked out, and then he kind of writes a response to it after that. So that's a very direct and kind of cutthroat way of protesting against the representation of deaf people in that poem. Although I don't think it's necessarily as black and white as that. I've talked to people in depth about that. So you've got something like that. But then, I mean, I feel like the way a lot of my either borrowed lines or responses come from, I think a response poem, if it's, pretty explicitly and directly coming from something, whether it be a song or a piece of art or another poem, I think it comes more out of a necessity for me. I wouldn't sit down and think, I'm going to write a poem in response to this song now. I think it would be something that kind of just happened, and then you realise that you're actually thinking about that particular thing, that particular song, for example, more so when you're writing it, and so it ends up being a kind of unconscious response to it. And then borrowed lines wise, again, it can happen as something like that Nabokov, when that poem just affected me so profoundly, and the contradiction of that first line I thought was particularly interesting to play with, and that's why I used it. But then you say, like, in terms of putting Seamus Heaney into everything, again, it's not even necessarily something that is deliberate. I think he's just so kind of ingrained within me, and in my,
he takes over the pen.
I always think of the line, like thickened wine, summer's blood was in it. It's just an image that it's stuck with me for years and years and years. And when I wrote that in a poem, I didn't necessarily think about it, because it was just in my little quote bank in my head. I think if it feels like the right way of expressing something, and the only way of expressing something that specific, it means that it's inherently tied to the original poet. You're almost kind of thanking them in using it in your piece.
Because like, I think my thing with it was, like I sort of said, it feels like cheating on a maths test. But like, I always thought, like, the thing with writing, I get really in my own head, I'm like, well, someone said that before and they've done it in a better way. It's almost like, you know, when you read like a critic quote, and you've had like people say to you, well, just quote it, because like you can't say it better than they've said it. I sort of get, especially with like poetry, when it's like a new form for me, I'm like, there are so many bad people, like, why do I even have to write anything? But it's like getting in my own head about that. Sometimes it is okay to be like, they said it in a really powerful way, and I'm okay to lay a reference to that down and thank them for being so talented.
Well, I suppose it's also like, I mean, to think of it as like less taking and more like almost borrowing, or paying like homage to sort of thing, because you can change the way you look at it. If you look at it from like, you're just stealing someone's work, then you're going to look at it in a bad light. It's going to shine a bad light on it. But if you're looking at it as if you're paying homage to, and it's from a writer you really admire,
it's like putting a painting on a wall and framing it with some other little paintings around it, done by you.
That's very true.
Beautiful, guys.
I sometimes think of it as I'm writing something like, when I imagine somebody reading what I've written. And me being like, oh, also look at this.
Yeah, exactly,
That's how I kind of see it.
That's so cute.
Almost like you just
That's a really cool way.
You want to share that and be like, oh, that line, it's from this poem, go and read that.
I'm just a little fanboy at heart, is what you're saying.
Basically, yeah.
Well, basically, this introduces the whole episode, which is why I wanted to just get straight in there, because I sort of just wanted to pick, it was going to be your brain, but I'm going to pick both your brains, because I feel like I am the little growing poet, but I actually have so many bloody questions on poetry.
I love questions.
Because I just don't understand the form. Because I think there's something about it. We've had this conversation. You find prose quite restrictive.
Yeah.
I think I don't find it consciously restrictive, but I think I know what prose is. And so I know how to write it. And I feel like I can look at something like, that's prose. I could write something like, I'm writing prose purposefully. But I could not purposefully write poetry, because it just feels so free. I think it scares the hell out of me. And trying to define what that is in my head is like my current thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around, because then I feel like I actually might be a bit more comfortable writing it. So that's sort of what I want to try and pin down today. It's the mission of the episode. Right. Can Eryca define her poems? What poetry is?
I mean, I also feel like no one really ever understands the whole extent of poetry. I don't know if you feel like that as well.
I think that's the thing with it.
That's the thing, is like, you don't understand it, but you still write it.
Everyone has a affinity level, like a affinity and a sort of their own defined understanding of what constraints they work in, or what area they work in. I think that's why I want to try.
It can be literally anything. Well, I remember in first year, last year, I was really not a big fan of poetry. I didn't understand it at all.
That's how I am now.
But then I met Oliver, and then he basically said poetry can be literally anything you want it to be. And I think that sort of like hit home a little bit, that it can be literally anything you want it to be. And I quite liked that. The more you write poetry and the more you read poetry, you can learn more about different forms and stuff, which I think we want to talk about today as well, right?
We do.
And how you can restrict yourself in a form that is so unrestricting that it creates such unique pieces of art as well.
So today, I mean, Caleb sort of stole my whole
our lecturer just stole the
here,
whole idea,
which I think is quite rude.
Bit upsetting, is that?
Bit upset. I was in the pub, I looked at the lecture slides, and I was like, right, well,
that was the episode.
We're screwed now.
Thanks for that one. No, but like genuinely, I've come out of that seminar and I'm like, yes, I'm buzzing to this episode because I want to talk about it. I mean, my understanding with poetry is through forms. For me, like, obviously the forms that I'm most aware of is like sonnets.
Yeah.
Because Shakespeare was my king.
Like
And
the lyric.
Yeah, like a ballad, the romantics. Like I was big on Keats and big on metaphysical poetry. So I'm okay with conceits. I can do conceits. Give me a metaphor and I'm there. I can work that out. Newer poetry, I think, is a lot more experimental.
Yeah,
and that's,
definitely.
Yes, helps me.
See, it's great. 'Cause I think we're probably the opposite to you. Me more than Oliver, because you are a big classicist and I am really not.
Well, I mean, I'm moving.
Yeah, no,
She's
you are.
She's a moving
you
gal.
You are.
She's coming into the 21st century.
I read a few classics in 2024. What can I say? What can I say?
The Well of Loneliness?
I did read The Well of Loneliness. It was all right.
He read A Single
Man. It was
Man.
good. I read A Single Man. That was also all right. I
said
enjoyed
it. Was mid.
I didn't say mid. I said it was okay. But I'm not a big classics reader. I know. So deeply upset right now. So I guess I'm more used to the lack of form, but also newer forms that writers use.
Yeah. Forms are scary.
They are. They're terrifying.
My big one that I want to look at is narrative poetry. But my big question is, and I think Finn's really good to be here because he recently wrote narrative poetry.
Yeah, that's what I normally write.
When does narrative poetry become prose?
We were having this conversation.
And I still don't have an answer.
Question.
I don't think there is an answer.
I don't think there is either.
How can you look at it and be like, that's a poem and that's prose? Like, I don't... Because technically then I could just look at any piece of writing I've done and just go, that's a poem. Yeah. Can't I just hand that in for my workshop?
I suppose poetry tends to look at the deeper meaning of what's between
the lines.
But I wouldn't
say that. See, this is my problem. Like, I think, like...
Such a difficult
I'm
question.
not, like, not prose superiorist. I'm not going to, like, sit here and say prose is superior. I'm not going to sit here and say poetry is superior. I think that there is a level of prose that is incredibly simplified to try and explain poetry. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, in order to try and define what poetry is and what narrative, like, and what prose is so oversimplified. And as a prose writer, I'm like, no, come on. Like,
no, that is true.
Just me and my people rise up. My big question is, when do we... I mean, obviously, no, like, Oliver's very well versed and Finn is a lot further along in his...
I don't know.
Totally. So, obviously, our answer is probably not going to be correct.
But is there a correct answer?
This
is it, isn't it? It's so elusive.
But that's why I love it, though. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's why it scares me.
Yeah, but I think the fact that it's scary is a good thing. It's a good sign.
Yeah, it feels like walking off a cliff. And expecting to fly.
More.
See, I'm a poet, guys. No, but like, we're not going to be able to, define it and necessarily get it like dead on correct. But we can. At least I want to discuss your guys' views and what you would define as narrative poetry rather than prose.
Well, I feel like I wrote my first prose poem like a couple of weeks ago in one of the seminars.
3 weeks ago?
Yeah, two weeks ago, right? Yeah. I suppose it's difficult to blur the line. Well, it's quite a blurred line between prose poetry and prose.
Yeah.
But I suppose for me it was just like what felt right in the moment.
Right.
And I feel like poetry's all about what feels right in the moment.
So, like, why would you write a prose poem rather than a prose piece?
I was going to say about narrative poetry, but this also applies to prose poetry. I think one of the biggest advantages for me, if I'm going to write a narrative poem, is narrative time and the elasticity of it.
Yeah.
I feel like you can... I don't know if get away with is the right term, because it feels almost reductive to say, you can get away with, like, time jumps and etc. But I think having that fluidity in the way you write can be really quite freeing. And I know that for a lot of people, the structure and narrative time constraints that imposes, I suppose, you have to be kind of very aware of how you are moving through narrative time, right? Whereas I think with poetry, not only can you, again, it all sounds very reductive to say, like, disregard narrative time, because it's not, it's still central.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of room, which I find exciting, to play with the idea of time. And especially because fundamentally for me, poetry is just about feeling. Poetry is a feeling. So I think even with narrative poetry, it feels like you are, being narrative with a specific focus on either the internal self or the specifics of the moment. Whereas I feel like with prose, perhaps you need to set a kind of scene. You have to put the groundwork in. You have to get the fundamentals down. So, you have to build from the ground up with prose, right? But I feel like with a poem, you can say, okay, well, we're just in this room, but this is how the person's feeling. And nobody's going to question that in a poem. But if you opened a novel and you were just told you were in a room, there's no description, I don't know where I am, I'm so disorientated.
Well, you'd know,
But I know exactly how the character feels. Right? You can't have that in a novel unless it's deliberate.
No. And I also write my prose poetry differently to how I write my prose.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Say more on that.
Yeah. So I guess I'm quite like a dry writer anyway.
Yeah.
But with my prose, I'm so much more descriptive in certain areas than with my poetry. And with my poetry, I'm more descriptive in other areas.
Right.
For example, with the prose poem that I brought in, I talked about the guy's mind wandering around the bed, and he sort of sees his own body parts, he feels his own body parts through his mind, but he also sees it. I wouldn't write like that in prose. I would describe the scene more.
What I loved about that piece was it was so focused and honed in on the contortion of the body, which again I feel like just in the middle of a random novel
wouldn't.
If it was your random novel, so we're talking about subjectivity now.
Yeah.
I feel like I wouldn't see that. But when you come and do like prose poetry, you have opportunities to kind of flex different muscles that you wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I love about it as well. Plus, with my like novels, I tend to tackle themes sort of like head on. So with a novella that I'm working on at the moment, it deals quite heavily on like depression and grief and stuff like that, and it deals with that through someone losing their brother and how he deals with his grief. But you can see quite clearly how he deals with his grief. With my poetry, I tend to sort of like allude to that.
I think that my relationship with prose is a lot like your guys' relationship with poetry. Because I think for me, that's just, not even that I'm more caught up, I just think it's natural to me to just waffle, maybe. Because like that was how I would talk in real life. For me, poetry is more purposeful.
Tactical.
Yeah, like you can't necessarily, as you said, waffle on as long.
Yeah, I think this is like maybe again this is subjective. This is how I view it, and I think this is probably why I find it very difficult to like. I would love to write narrative and like prose poetry, but I need to try and like work out the difference before I could actually go into writing that, because otherwise I think it would just end up as a prose piece. I think I said about this today. Like I've only ever seen people's finalized pieces for most writing forms, but with poetry especially, like I suppose I have a more on a pedestal view of it. It's like out of reach for me. I'm like, wow, that's not.
Right, look at the state of my page today.
Yeah, but again, like I've always had poetry is like this untouched like avenue of like I would never be competent enough to do that. Like I'm never gonna be good enough as a writer to do that, because my brain just I don't know. That's just how I was taught to look at poetry, which is really bad, and screw the academic system for that. But I think for me that means that poetry is so much more. I would sit at a page and I'd stare at it for about half an hour before I could write 2 words. And like I'd have to pick those words from like the deep dark caresses of my brain to be something semi beautiful enough to vomit onto a paper. Again, it's probably because like my relation. Well, no, because even modern poetry that I read is really fucking beautiful. Like I just view like poetry as like this beautiful thing. Like it's just so. I don't know, but I think like there's something purposefully elusive about it.
I don't know. I think also it kind of touched on what you were saying. Touched on this collection. Yeah, Fitzgerald have poetry series out now, by the way. And this is like the second of 3 called Modern Poetry, and it is very much what it says on the tin. Modern poetry.
Nice.
No, because I think what's so intriguing about this is I find it quite hard. Like I was trying to write a recommend card for this the other day, and I couldn't condense the sheer volume of sporadic thoughts I had from reading this into one little kind of card, because she converses with, critiques, and expresses admiration for poetic form, essentially. And there are pieces in this collection that are titled after the form in which they are written.
Oh, that's cool.
Like there is one called poem, there's one called sonnet, there's one called villanelle, there's one called folk song, and then you have an amazing one called ballad that ends with bitch. So you have such
wow.
And that again, that is literally what it is. The ballad ends with the word bitch.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That is great. I like that.
But I'm pretty sure this was derived from all of the textbook poetry that she was taught through school and college, and she's basically taken one of those textbooks and kind of like torn it into little pieces, and kind of like what we were doing today. Like she's torn up the textbook and rearranged it in different ways to kind of make you question A, the way poetry is taught and perceived, and B, how that can be both reductive and freeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it just complicates the whole conversation even more.
Yeah.
But I think if you're interested in modern poetry as a form that is quite something you find intimidating,
Yeah, right, okay,
intimidated
yeah.
by, I think this is an interesting one to read. Well, she's literally weighing up the pros and cons of modern poetry and also exemplifying that through her own writing, which is at times both beautiful, elusive, violent, incredibly on the nose a lot of times. So it's a really unique collection, but I think, based on what you were just saying, that really speaks to this, and it's really cool to see new poetry books coming out that are, yes, published by Fitzcarraldo, which is like a relatively literary highbrow publisher, that is still questioning not only a form, but the form in which they are writing.
My thing that I just want to preface as well, because I feel like I've not really communicated this well enough, I have nothing against poetry and I want to learn about poetry and I am like so not anti-poetry anymore. I used to be, because I was a fool, and also it was taught very poorly to me. I want to have these conversations with you guys, not because I'm challenging your understanding of poetry, your love of poetry, your subjective. We've lost Oliver to a book of poetry.
He's not listening anymore.
I don't want to challenge your guys' love of poetry, but rather I think someone needs to shake me by the shoulders and be like, forget everything you know.
Even like this.
It's so bad.
It seems wrong to curl now within the confines of a poem. You can't hide from what you've made inside what you made. Or so I'm told.
Really interesting.
I think even that, or so I'm told at the end.
Yeah.
Just brings into question that she's not answering any questions with this.
It's deep.
Yeah, of course. But also I feel like poetry in general, at least from a younger age, is taught so poorly.
It's so poorly
incredibly
taught.
poorly. When we were all in high school, there was COVID as well, so we didn't, well, at least my school, for our English literature, we dropped one of the classes that we were going to be doing it on, and that was poetry, so we didn't learn about poetry at all for GCSE. So I had very little understanding of poetry except from my year 8 classes, and that was it.
I think the thing with poetry in school, and I think this is probably why I'm even more daunted by poetry, is with prose you are taught to look at the narrative as a whole, and you are taught to appreciate the narrative as a whole and what the book is trying to do outside of what is written within it. I think even when you are writing essays on word choices, it is not to celebrate that as, wow, what an impressive choice of word. It is rather to look at, okay, but what does this word mean? Whereas with poetry in school, and I know this because when I taught poetry to year 10s, they found it incredibly difficult, and I think it was taught this way as well to them. You are taught to look at poetry line by line, word by word. True. You are taught to look at it as line breaks and syllables and beats, and not as this form of a narrative that's telling a tale and trying to actually communicate something to you. You're supposed to look at the book
how it's being communicated.
Exactly. And I mean to the T. They have capitalized this word. Why have they done that? So then to me, I'm like, oh my God, do I capitalise this word in this poem? And I don't know if Oliver was taught it like that, but that's how I was taught it. And also it was war poetry, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, we learned about war poetry in the earlier years as well.
Not a fun time. Didn't enjoy it.
To be honest, I think I agree with what you're saying to an extent.
Yeah.
However, how you're talking about the fact how it was taught and how it is taught in the education system, I am fully with you on.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've read, but I wrote a whole article the other day based on Andrew McMillan's collection about how I read that at the start of this year and tried to switch off my overly critical literature student eye. And I just read it and let it wash over me and let the feelings wash over me.
Yeah.
And I found that to be incredibly impactful and quite profound. It's something that I try and do as much as I can, especially in poetry, but ultimately it's difficult to avoid when you're so wired to close reading.
Yeah.
So it's that weird inner conflict of, I think it's important to read poetry without too much critical thought, to let that feeling wash over you.
Yeah.
However, not in a school sense, perhaps in just a general close reading sense, or in a maybe university essay sense. Yeah. There's also a whole new side to a poem.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
that you uncover through being that, through picking it apart to that extent. But also, I don't think, for me, and again, I think this is where it maybe differs between secondary school and maybe university level.
Yeah.
I don't think you're picking it apart going, oh my God, they thought about this, they're a genius. you're picking it apart thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've got that from this.
Yeah, well, this is the thing.
Yeah.
And
it's much more about
what you take from it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, the meaning that you glean from something
and I'm
through
not
your close reading.
Just, again, because I feel like this wasn't communicated, I'm not criticising close reading. I think close reading is integral to the experience of literature. I think I wouldn't be studying literature if I didn't agree with the idea of close reading. My thing is, I'm saying I don't think of them as geniuses now, but that's something that I'm working on.
Yeah.
But the school system teaches you to think that way.
I do agree
when
with
you're
that.
in secondary school.
100%.
And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I know they're not geniuses. My point is, I think that's such a toxic thought process. Yeah. And I think that the way that prose is taught in secondary school is that it's such a more accessible form of writing. Yeah. I mean, in primary school, you don't write poetry. I mean, I used to do Big Write every week, which was like, you sit, you don't talk for an hour, you get given a picture on the board and you write, or a video or something, and you got to write a prose piece about it, right? They didn't make me sit down and say poetry is easy and, you know, it's something that you can do quite naturally. Not necessarily easy, but naturally. The same way you can write prose quite naturally. They didn't do that. So then my first introduction with poetry was through secondary school. And this is, I think, where all my problems come from. And this is, again, why I wanted to have this conversation, why I wanted to have this episode, and why I'm trying to get more into poetry. Because secondary school has ruined poetry for me. It's ruined poets for me. It has ruined poetry as a whole for me. For literal years, I did GCSE poetry. For literal years, I refused to pick up a poem. Because I read war poetry. And I mean, war poetry can be great. I think Ozymandias, looking back on it, great time. Not gonna lie, Conflicting Words was actually what it was. Ozymandias was great. The Kamikaze was pretty solid. I respect that. But like, you are taught to strip it down bare, and you are taught to be like, these people are so amazing, and this is like amazing, and also the poetry. I don't know.
But like it is.
No, but I mean, like, it felt out of reach because of that.
This is the thing, is I did Feminine Gospels at A-level, and again, because of the way it was kind of taught, I have grown to hate it. However, I have read Caroline Duffy since, read The Bees, and I've revisited poems from Feminine Gospels, and I find something so unfathomably profound about her style. Yeah. That, like, surrealist, bodily. Yeah. It's like a blend of fucking, like, Kafka and... I don't know.
I can see that. And then we obviously did Love Through the Ages. Love Through the Ages, lads.
That bloody pamphlet we got in the exam. That fucking print-out pamphlet with the ones you could see. I had the little picture of them in the corner, like...
But again, like, I think it's a testament to how it was taught to me, though, to be honest, because I had different teachers for Feminine Gospels as I had for Love Through the Ages. Right. Yeah. And I loved Love Through the Ages, and I hated Feminine Gospels. But again, you're taught to actually look at the poets in A-level rather than context becomes a lot more integral. Yeah. And I mean poet context, not like worldly context. I think with war poetry, you're taught like, this is the war that was going on. This is what happened. Yeah. All these people died. Whereas with like Love Through the Ages, it's such a personal side of poetry. Like, I mean, Thomas Wyatt is a great example. I had to learn about, he was in love with Anne Boleyn and all that jazz. And I think that...
Yeah, because I feel like at that level, that wouldn't necessarily click with a lot of people.
Sure.
That's a very general thing. But in terms of teaching an entire cohort something for an exam, I feel like that contextually is very important. So, you know, if somebody wasn't to pick that up and they missed that, it would be a pretty severe loss if they were to write on it in their exam.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But my point is, like, I think poetry is taught not great.
I agree with you.
I think that's where it falls down.
But I also feel like there's a different way to look at poetry from a literature student perspective and from a creative writing student perspective.
There is.
Like, I'm not even a literature student.
Oh yeah, you're not. I always forget that about
I'm just a creative writer. You guys are both dual honours students, creative writing. I'm
Yay!
Well done, guys. But I'm just a creative writing student, so I think I would look at a poem probably different to how you two would, and I've been taught to look at poetry differently to how you two would, and same with prose as well. How did you start writing prose?
How did I start writing prose?
Yeah, just
I've never not written prose.
What, like from like a kid? Yeah, but as a kid, did you just pick up a pen and start writing.
Well, as a kid, like, you only know prose.
Yeah, but
I wasn't
you also,
taught poetry when I was like a
you
wee.
don't necessarily know prose, though, do you? You know narrative, right, and story.
Yeah.
You teach yourself prose.
Oh my god, I'm gonna have
That's a good point.
I'm about to have a
because it was
identity crisis.
Well, just because it was stripped so far back.
Yeah.
Was prose as a kid, because even as a kid, I remember writing stories. Like, I mean, I say as a kid, I didn't start properly reading until like year 7.
Valid.
Like in year 7 is when I started writing, really, or year 8 maybe. I mean, I'd start taking it more seriously as I grew older. But yeah, because it was stripped so far back, writing prose, which is again bringing back to the point where Oliver said poetry can be whatever you want it to be. If you strip it so far back that you don't know any of the forms and you don't know what to write, and you just start writing poetry. That's what I sort of did, and now I really prose poetry is probably my favourite.
Really?
Favourite form of poetry now. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing it.
Nice. Love that for you.
Because it's sort of like the blend between like narrative poetry and prose as well. I guess, well, it's clues in the name, I guess. So, you know.
I usually just think of prose poetry in that it takes the formal structure of prose.
Yeah.
And makes use more heavily of poetic
device
or poetic constraint in the form of prose.
Yeah. Cool.
It's a really good way to look at it, actually. The best thing to do is to just keep writing.
Keep writing. Really? Real quick, what we've been reading lately? What you been reading lately?
What have you been reading lately, Oliver?
I'm about halfway through this little volume called Strangers on a Pier, which is all about the complexities of place.
Prose poem?
No, it's just it's a piece of biography.
Oh, nice.
Bit of family history, and he's an amazing novelist, so I wanted to read this. It's very intriguing.
You've been reading a lot of biographies lately, ain't you?
Yeah. And then reading The Boyhood of Cain by Malcolm Hurst, which is really, really beautiful so far. I've been looking forward to this coming out, so that's that. And then I'm still making my way through this coming of age as a poet, Milton Keats, Eliot Plath. We read the Plath thing for last week.
We did, yeah.
And I love her essay style. I think she's so precise. So I'm reading the rest of the essays.
Interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. What about you guys?
What have you been reading then?
I recently finished Meditations in an Emergency by Frank O'Hara.
Oh.
Which my partner's roommate lent me. And it was probably the most abstract piece of poetry that I've read.
He's an interesting guy.
He is, yeah. Yeah, there were some parts that I liked and some parts that I didn't, which I also feel like shows how subjective poetry is as a whole. Like, even if it's by the same writer.
Yeah.
You're never going to like every poem.
It's like every song, isn't it? Like a song
exactly.
on an album,
or every short story in a short story collection.
Yeah.
It's like we don't talk about Seamus Heaney, The Spirit Level. We just don't talk about it.
No, and that's the one Seamus Heaney book I have as well, right?
It's the only one I've read that I was like...
Yeah.
Oliver!
I didn't get on with it.
That is...
This feels like blasphemy.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So we just don't talk about it.
Are you okay?
No. Let's move on.
I am in the middle of a book called The Villa by Rachel somebody. I'll have a look from my Goodreads. By Rachel.
Rachel Green from The Friends.
The Villa by Rachel.
The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. And it's really interesting because I don't read thrillers very often or at all.
That's thrilling.
That is thrilling because I believe it's good to like it's good to read outside of your preferred genres, I guess, which help write your genre that you enjoy writing or your form that you enjoy writing.
True.
Which is, I also think, is quite interesting. Actually, a point in regards to different genres compared to poetry as well.
Speak your truth.
Because even in prose, there's different ways to write prose.
Yep.
Right.
Hello.
Mum entered the chat.
Attachment, one image.
So yeah, there's different ways of writing prose in different genres.
Mother.
Which I find quite interesting because, like, I wouldn't necessarily know how to write a thriller. But I can take different elements of thriller and apply it to my own prose writing as well.
Yeah.
And even my own poetry writing as well.
Yeah, I like that. That's interesting.
What are you reading?
Trying to read The Assassin's Apprentice. Trying.
Oh, by Robin Hobb.
So
what a
good,
book.
Though.
Such a good book.
Just haven't had time, to be honest. And when I have had time, I've been reading Venus and Adonis for uni, which is Shakespeare. And I actually am quite disappointed in myself because I didn't know it existed. Recently found out it was one of his biggest selling things. Feel quite disappointed in myself.
I hadn't heard of that one, I don't think.
It's poem. It's not play, and it was based off Ovid's Metamorphosis.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah.
Sorry.
Guys,
I'm not
I feel so like 1v2 in this episode. I think that it's really interesting in terms of adaptation of source material, not being afraid to take a narrative and twist it to perform your own purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, and I think Shakespeare kind of ate it up. On that note, before we wrap up, because there was one other thing that I want to talk about. Forms.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, poetry's crazy. Obviously, I'm not trying to touch form yet. What?
But yeah, poetry's crazy. Yeah, what are you saying?
No, I was just going to say poetry's crazy, and one thing that I'm finding really exciting on this whole journey is poetic forms. Because obviously I said I find poetry quite squarey. Find poetry quite squirrely. Because I'm trying to make Oliver laugh because I'm worried that he's angry.
He's so annoyed.
I'm not angry.
He's just disappointed.
No, I'm not.
We'll break this down.
I just needed to finish the phrase, that's all.
I just find poetry quite scary, and I think having forms is actually making it more fun for me, because I just think...
That's interesting.
I know. You think it would make me hate myself, but I actually love it. I think I'm finding...
really enjoying constraints.
I really love the feeling. Today, I did... What was the name of the thing? I don't remember. I don't remember the form that I did, but I did this form. And like...
Nice.
Nice, guys. This is such an informative podcast. No, I did this form. One thing that I really love about like poetic forms is when like something works without you even planning for it to actually have like worked really well. And I think like that's really fun. It's like I loved writing a sonnet the other day because I loved the Volta. Love a spicy Volta.
Oh god, yeah.
Love a spicy Volta. And like I just think that it makes me think about things in a different way. I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
So is there a form that you guys particularly like to read or write in, or a form that you particularly hate to read / write in?
I hate reading haikus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, fair, yeah.
Because they feel too mic droppy. It feels like someone's been like...
That's such a good way of describing a haiku.
I'm out. And I'm not into that energy.
No, fair enough.
Yeah, it gives like God complex energy. And I don't
Yeah, not the vibe, not the vibe.
I think there's a serious skill in writing a good haiku.
Good haiku.
But I feel like to write a good haiku is incredibly difficult. To read them.
Yeah, no.
Grim times.
No, I agree with you. I don't think I've ever written one. In fact, actually, I think today was the first time I've actually played with form.
Really?
Yeah. I used the form, again, I forgot. It began with a G.
We're bad people.
But I've forgotten what the form was.
It's just their foreign names. Yeah, but I don't remember music words.
No, I don't.
No.
And I've been studying that for 10 years.
But I guess I found it quite interesting because it used a lot of repetition as well.
I really like what we did today, which was the ripping.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that was interesting.
Really cool. So basically our lecturer made us write a poem and then 10 lines, rip them up, reorder them. And I think that's like opened my eyes a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's so funny that in the first ever seminar of that module, I was like, I found it really interesting the way David Bowie would write, how he would like cut out newspapers and stuff.
And then in week 4,
doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Nice.
So haikus hate, and you don't really write purposeful forms. I don't think, do you?
Not really.
He's a free guy.
Free spirit, like a bird.
I'm free.
Yeah, I prefer like I find constraints really interesting and helpful to write with.
Yeah.
And I enjoy reading them pretty much universally because I think it's just really intriguing to see what comes out of restriction.
Do you think that's because that you use poetry as more of a, not an outlet, but like a process of free-flowingness? Or do you think...
perhaps.
Because I think like with constraints, like it does require you to stop and think.
Yeah.
And plan. Like, I mean, you had I've never seen anyone do this. You had a whole page planning what it was going to look like.
Oh, wow. Did you?
Oh, yeah, I did little diagrams so I could see what line was going to go where. And
interesting.
Stuff. Yeah,
that's so interesting.
But yeah, I do write in closed forms, but I do find free verse for certain things, especially because a lot of the stuff I write or have written in the past like year or so has been specifically for spoken word.
Yeah, true.
The approach of writing, there's a whole other topic, but the approach of writing spoken word or spoken word poetry, depending on who you are, and poetry, designed more to just be read and mulled over is incredibly different. Yeah.
Sorry, just coming back to like my whole like what is prose poetry. Do you remember a few weeks ago we did that poem? I've seen it before, and it's like free form, whatever, where like you write a poem that's just like a massive paragraph.
It was about the absent father.
Right? Absent father.
Yeah.
He gets it.
I know which one you mean, yeah.
Oh, yes.
When he used repetition of you over and over again.
And it was like, just like a big paragraph.
Mm.
So you can do that.
Yeah.
That's a thing you can do.
Yeah.
And just be like, it's not a paragraph, it's...
just a long stanza. Oh, it's just a poem.
Or a poem, just whatever.
My brain is so...
One of my favourite forms is, I guess it's prose poetry, but block text. Yeah. Separated by forward slashes.
Interesting.
Forward slashes?
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that's like what you do when you're in like an essay, isn't it? You like write a forward slash, cheeky little forward slash.
There's a good example of it here.
Oh, look!
I'm showing you.
Bit of a
in Lampoonery of the Shallow, out now.
That style.
Yeah.
Big stashes.
Alright.
That was my nearest visual reference. But yeah, I really enjoyed that particular style of poetry, especially as spoken word, because it changes the way you read it.
I mean, you got that book, and I saw Sudoku poetry earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, I've not heard of...
Poetry is wild.
It's good. This is how like kind of shallow I am in terms of buying things. But if I open a novel and I see that the text is ordered in a unique way, I won't read what it's about. I will just buy it.
So fair.
Like I will just
very
buy it.
fair.
And that goes back to our last episode on aesthetic.
Yes. Oh yeah, I forgot we said that. Talked about that. That was quite interesting. Yeah.
That's the whole episode. It's been like an hour talking about it.
No, I remember it now. It was right. But yeah, I particularly like form, playing with form.
Playing with form. Playing with form. Yeah, I think that's like my big thing. This is why I want to go into poetry. I think it's so playful. But like,
so play around.
Yeah, but I've never been good with that sort of thing.
Well, now is the time.
Now's the time. Do we have anything else you want to say on poetry? I want to say that Seamus Heaney made me cry.
Yeah, true. I mean, you read the first line of it.
I said it to Oliver, and he just went, which one? Like, he did the creepiest little sadistic smirk.
I need to read that collection now, because that first line, like, hooked me.
Which one was it?
Oh, yeah, the early Purges.
The early Purges.
Yeah,
that was rough.
It was a brilliant first line,
sat with my boyfriend, and he told me to put a poetry collection down.
Return break. Dawn shoot.
He's just looking and getting excited now.
We've lost him again.
Yeah.
Bye.
He's going to reread that after this.
So thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, no, thank you for listening if you made it this far, because this is a long episode for us, actually.
It's been... Oh, wow.
Well,
it has
not
been
really.
quite long.
To be fair, that's probably about normal.
First. Well,
just
thank you
feels
for
long.
having me on, guys. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for being
Really
our first
enjoyed
guest.
my time. It's been great.
Thanks for helping, trying to make me understand poetry.
I mean, I don't really understand it myself.
Do I understand it? A little bit.
Good.
A little bit. Still don't know. Still don't have an answer to my first question.
As long as you like the form.
Have a great time with the form. Go write some weird forms, guys.
Or if you just enjoy poetry, if you just like poetry in general, then that's...
Starting to.
Good.
Starting to.
Yeah.
We've lost Oliver.
Yeah. He's
Put the book down.
Zoned out.
Oliver, put the book down.
Are we done? No.
Oh my god.
Oliver doesn't want to be here.
No, I just want to read more Death of the Naturalist now. It's been a couple of weeks.
It's been a couple of weeks. Oh my god.
Right, so Oliver can go and
I need to buy this bloody
Death
book.
of the Naturalist. Thank you so much for watching, listening, whatever you've done. Appreciate everything. I appreciate that you guys have been waiting for a few episodes, but I'm sure you'll survive.
See you next time.
Sayonara. I'll try and drag Oliver for another episode.
Sometime soon.
Can we do another poetry episode?
Can we do another poetry episode?
You looked so dead after this one.
You barely have spoken.
Oh my god.
This might be the...
You looked so dead after this episode. And you're like, I'm just doing another poetry.
I want to do another poetry.
There's just so much ground to cover.
There is
you
a lot of ground.
barely helped me cover any ground here.
I was just listening to what you had to say.
It was quite interesting. I found myself doing that.
You're in your own world, so I was like, I'm just
to be fair, you both said some really interesting points that I was just like,
I feel
listening.
bad.
No, it's fine. I just didn't want to interrupt your...
It's the worst. Okay, well, come back for another poetry episode at some point. Yeah, so thank you again for watching.
Yes.
Sayonara for real this time. You're going to say bye properly to your fans.
Thank you.
Go check out Oliver's poetry collection.
Yes, do. Yeah. Give him a little look.
Actually, yeah, because I would like to buy a few beers after the next few shows, so if you get a book, then I can buy a couple of beers.
Yeah.
There you
support.
Bit against us. Nice.
Yeah.
Right,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.
See ya.